So today, what we're going to do is we are continuing our discussion about SAP HANA data provisioning. Yesterday, we went over the high-level information of what data provisioning is all about. So we said data provisioning is the term that we use specifically within SAP HANA. The equivalent term in information technology is called ETL. The E stands for extraction, the T stands for transformation, and L stands for loading. And we understood that in a traditional world, extraction is nothing but it establishes the connection. So the first question is, can anybody tell me what are the different types of flat files that can be supported by this flat file data provisioning technique? As a quick way to jog your memory. Can anybody help me out? Perfect. So Mike is saying CSV is one supported format. Are there any other? Perfect. So there are three: CSV, XLS, and XLSX file. CSV is nothing but comma separated or comma delimited file. XLS is your old version of Excel workbook. The new version of your Excel workbook is the XLSX file. So those are the three file formats that can be supported by the flat file data provisioning. What special tool do we need to perform this flat file data provisioning technique? What tool would you choose if you were asked to perform a flat file data provisioning? What would you need? Can anybody help me out? Are there any special requirements? Perfect. So there are no special additional tools required. All you need is your SAP HANA Studio. The next thing is, let's assume that I have a field called as country, and that contains information like USA, India, all with mixed case letters. When I send it, this is in the file. So the U and I are uppercase and everything else is lowercase. When I send it to the table within SAP HANA, I want everything to be uppercase. Can I make this kind of data changes or data manipulation using flat file data provisioning technique? Data level changes are not possible in flat file, if you remember. Using the flat file wizard yesterday, we saw that if at all I have to make a change, what I can do is I can make the following changes. If the table is not created, so that you have to make sure that exactly, that's what I'm going to explain. All changes are at the table level. What do I mean by that? Let's assume that within your HANA system, the new table does not exist. You are going to create the table on the fly using the flat file wizard. Then what are the changes you can perform? You can add or remove columns. Would everybody agree? Age, city, and state. It would automatically do a mapping and it would say there is customer name. If you did not do anything and you just went with the wizard, it would have just copied, did a mirror and said, these are the fields that are going to be available. So the things that you can change are, you can add or remove, which means that I can say, I don't need this name anymore. I can remove a column. I can say, I want to add a new country field. So add or remove columns is possible. Again, this is a change that is happening at the table level. I can change data type, length, primary key, and the name of the column. Would everybody agree? What is the only restriction? It is only possible to do these changes if the table did not exist in your SAP HANA system. If your table is being created as part of the flat file data provisioning, only then you can do it. If the table does exist, if you wanted to make these changes, you can still do it not through your flat file data provisioning wizard, but you will have to use a SQL statement. The SQL statements that I have provided in our discussion board, you will have to use that to make the manipulation. The next changes you can do are, you can select whether the table is column store or row store. Does that make sense for everybody? If the table did not exist, all these information are at the table level. No changes can be done data level. I cannot do data manipulation using flat file. So I also mentioned yesterday, Where would you use this? The use case for using a flat file. Can anybody tell me what are the use cases? Where typically when you go into a project, would you choose to use? Perfect. Fred is absolutely right. Predominantly, when you are ready to go live, you're ready to launch this project into the production environment, your company comes and says that, hey, I have some historical data that I want you to load. Because it has been archived, I cannot give it to you from a SQL server or from an Oracle table or from an SAP table. I have all these files stored in an Excel file or in a CSV file. You can use that as a one-time load. And that is how you would use historical. And the second thing is, as I mentioned, you could use it for proof of concept or for initial playing around. When you're waiting on something and you have not already got your established connections to SQL Server or Oracle or whatever applications you need to connect to, or if you want to try out something, you don't want to go with a full-blown source system, you don't want to connect, you don't want to waste your time connecting to different source systems, not knowing what the output is going to be. When you're just playing around and you want to just do a proof of concept and make sure your thought process is going to work, you can just throw some data into an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file and play around with it. Once the proof of concept is successful, then you would extend it. You would say that now that the proof of concept has been successfully established, let me go with the project and start working on the actual connections to different source systems. The limitations with flat file data provisioning, right? It's very simple. You can only use it with 3 different file formats. It has no transformation capabilities. And there was one other thing that I believe it was Vijayata who brought it up yesterday. I was hoping that somebody would ask me that question. Let's assume that, let's say I have this table called customer name, age, city, and state. Let's assume that this is the file C01 Tim 20 Houston and Texas. And then there is C02 Tom 30 Dallas, Texas. Let's assume that this is the file I got. I've been asked to push this data to a table in SAP HANA. I use the flat file wizard. I create a new table called customer on the fly. And I push this data into my target HANA system. So let's assume that I'm just going to keep it simple, I'll say C01, C02, Tim, Tom, 20, 30, Houston, Texas, Dallas, Texas. Let's assume that I was able to load this information into my target HANA system. Now, somebody comes and says that, oh, you know what, I made a mistake. C02 was actually not Tom, it was Mark. They made a correction to an existing file. And let's assume that when I loaded this table, I did not load anything as primary key. So I didn't make customer as my primary key. Now, if I use the wizard and push this data to this particular table, what is going to happen? My question is, because C02 already exists, will it go and overwrite Tom to Mark, or will it keep perfect? So Vijayata is saying it will append. Right? What it means is, if the primary key is not established, the system will tell you that you can send multiple duplicate values for the customer. So which means that it will bring C01 again, Tim again, 20 Houston, Texas, and then C02 Mark, 30 Dallas, Texas. It will keep appending the data. So one challenge you will have with flat file data provisioning. Again, these are common things that you would get asked in an interview. If you go and say that, hey, you know what, I've been working on flat file data provisioning, I've used it for a lot of historical data loads and for proof of concept, they'll say, how will you do overwrites? I want to overwrite an existing record. There was an existing record called C02 Tim. I made a mistake. It should have been Mark instead of Tim. Can you go fix this record? Using the flat file data provisioning, you cannot do overwrite capability. You will either be able to append the data if there is no primary key, and if there is a primary key, it will fail due to integrity violation constraint. The error message will be integrity violation constraint. So now you might ask me, how will I go about doing an override? Exactly. Vijay, that's absolutely right. You will either, there are two options you can choose, Vijayata. One is you can go to the table, and I will show it to you when I get into the system. You can, if you remember, sorry, you have a schema called best, and when I expand it, I have a table folder, and when I expand it, I will have the name of the table called customer. I can right click on this table and I can say delete. When you click on delete, it will open up a new box and it will ask, are you willing to delete the contents, delete the table structure? I'm not word by word saying what exactly would be written on the box. I don't remember it exactly. Or do you want to delete the rows in the table? It will ask you two choices. The first choice will go ahead and completely remove the table from the system. There won't be this table customer anymore when you do this option. Or if you want to just delete the data inside, but you want to keep the table intact, the table will remain, but there won't be any data inside it, you would choose the second option. When you choose the second option, it would go ahead and drop all the data inside the table and the table will become empty now. That is one option, as Vijayata suggested. The other option you can do is, if you know for a fact there is only one or two records that you want to delete and overwrite, you can go to your SQL statement editor and you can write a statement like delete from whatever the table always is associated with the schema name. Let's say customer. Delete from this table. You put a where condition where my customer is equal to C02. If I pass this statement, it will keep all the other remaining records intact in the table. It will go ahead and delete only that particular record. So if it used to be Tom, by running this command, it will say delete from. Where are you deleting it from? From this table. The table belongs in this particular schema. What do you want to delete? If you just ran this particular first half of this section, it's nothing but doing your delete the rows of the table. It will go ahead and wipe out everything in your table. But if you don't want to wipe out everything, you want to wipe out a specific set of records, you put a where condition and say whatever the field name is equal to pass a condition. If the value is a string, put it within single quotes. If the field, let's say I had age, I was doing, and age was called an integer, I would say age is equal to 20 without any single quotes around it. You can write this statement and this will go ahead and wipe out that particular record. Now your job is not over. You have wiped out the record. Now you have to create a source file, which is customer name, age, city, state, and you provide only that record. Mark, 30, Dallas, and Texas, and send this data again. Now it will just append that record. So eventually it would look like C01 and C02 exist in the table. Does that make sense? Okay, these are some of the common practical things that an interview panel would ask you. How would I go about deleting a record and overwriting a record? They won't say delete, which would be like giving away the answer. They would ask, how will I make an override capability work within a flat file data provisioning technique? You can say, you can either drop the entire data content and send the data file all over again. Or if you know that there are only selective records that needs to be deleted, you first go ahead and write a select statement, a delete statement to delete the records, and then subsequently send a file with only those corrected data set, that is the corrected records that needs to be pushed to the table, and that will take care of loading the information. You can even write, you don't even need to send a file to do it. When I go into the system, right, I will make this modification, whatever I just explained. I will quickly show it to you in the system. I will first delete a specific record, and then I will, instead of sending it as a file, I can even write as insert statement and push that record into the table. All right, I'll show it to you when we get to the system. So by a quick show of yes or no, can everybody let me know? Are we good with flat file data provisioning? Can we move on to the next type of data provisioning? Excellent. All right. The next data provisioning that we are going to talk about is called SLT. SLT stands for SAP Landscape Transformation. There is a little bit of history behind what this tool is, and it's an extremely powerful tool. One of the most commonly used data provisioning technique across organizations, and there is a reasoning behind it. So first, let me explain in what scenarios is SAP SLT landscape, that is SLT landscape transformation technique is used. It's used in operational data mart situation. I know many of you will be confused what it even means, right? I'll give you an explanation. And by giving this explanation, you will understand this was the first type of data provisioning that SAP HANA used. This is the very first one, even before flat file data provisioning and all that. SAP Landscape Transformation, which is SLT, was the first type of data provisioning that was used by SAP HANA. So if you jog your memory, if you go back several sessions behind, we talked about what were some of the challenges when we talked about the SAP evolution. We said some of the challenges prior, what happened before, and then in order to solve those problems, how did we move on to the next technology, right? So if everybody remembers, an OLTP system is like our SAP ERP system. Would everybody agree? Hope everybody remembers this concept by now. Let's assume I have a SAP system, SAP ERP system. It could contain, what are the three major modules within an ERP system? Can anybody tell me? Perfect. Finance. Finance is one of the major modules. Logistics and HR. Perfect. Thank you. Logistics and HR stands for human resources. These are the main modules that we have, but each module can have several sub applications, which means that a finance can have concentration for accounts payable, can have focus on accounts receivable, can have focus on general ledger, on investment management, so on and so forth. There are so many sub applications within the SAP ERP system. Similarly, logistics can have sales and distribution, material management, production planning, plant maintenance, production planning. HR has budget, time and administration, and then payroll administration. There are so many different submodules that are available. Time and expense. Like something was skipping my mind. Time and expense. So what I'm essentially saying here is, yes, benefits, oh, not budget, my bad. So benefits, time and expenses, payroll administration. So each and every application, each and every module has several sub applications. Now, these systems are supported by, it could be a HANA system, it could be some kind of an Oracle, SQL Server, whatever it is. Let's say in the old world, IBM DB2, whatever was the database was supporting it. Now, what was the main intention of a OLTP system? What is the main functionality of an OLTP system? Every time a transaction comes into the system, I have to push that transaction into its respective tables as efficiently as possible. So my focus has always been in writing right transactions into my underlying database. Would everybody agree? Hopefully everybody remembers that this is the main goal. But did we stop here? When users started seeing there are so much data sitting in this particular system, users started asking, hey, can I create reports and view this information? What is this data good if I'm not able to run reports on this particular system? But what happened? Now I'm saying, can I read from this system? You have certain bandwidth in the system. You can only support so much of, if you have a interstate or a highway, and the highway has 3 lanes on one side and 3 lanes on the other side. Maximum there can only be 6 parallel roads, right? 3 on each side. You cannot try to squeeze in other line on both sides and try to push more vehicles on this road. Similarly, there is only limited bandwidth the system can handle, and majority of that bandwidth is allocated for writing the data, because you don't want to lose the transaction that's coming through. But now, because there is a heavy demand for reading the information, as the system said that now I figured out I don't want to use the OLTP SAP ERP system for reporting. I will create another application, if you all remember, which is the SAP BW, which is OLAP, and it was supported by another database like Oracle or SQL Server, and the data was pushed from here to here, and the reporting was done from this particular system. But we now know the story behind it, that beyond the point we did not sustain the performance with the BW system, because a lot of data was being loaded, a lot of historical data was being loaded, and we understood that BW accelerator came into the market, and that was not a sustainable option. You could not scale it up as and when the demand for the data keeps increasing. So what happened? SAP said, okay, I'm going to replace this system and come up with a tool called SAP HANA, which is an in-memory system, and it can do all the reporting for you. And I told you, when SAP HANA came into the market, organizations were not willing to move into an unknown database. It's very reasonable, right? For bigger organization, they know that Oracle and SQL has been, even if it has been slow, it has been performing as per their expectation. So they wouldn't have jumped into an in-memory new tool. So how did SAP HANA get into the market? How did they make their baby steps into the market? Is by saying that I agree that you cannot change any of your systems. Vijayata is absolutely right. I will start this process through a sidecar implementation. Please give me a baby step. I will only do a sidecar implementation. The sidecar implementation means identify one particular area from your ERP system. It could be accounts payable, it could be accounts receivable, GL, whatever it is. Identify one particular sub-module or sub-application called accounts payable, where you think that there is a heavy demand for reporting. And give me that alone and push that information alone into SAP HANA. And then do the reporting on that and see the performance. I am leaving the OLTP system to run on its traditional database as is. I am taking a small chunk of data, a small subject area like accounts payable, and moving that into SAP HANA and doing a sidecar implementation, just to show you proof that if you were to use HANA for reporting, because of its in-memory capability, it's going to show you that it's much, much more capable than any traditional databases. So when they started taking this individual applications into SAP HANA, how did they push the data? There has to be some mechanism to push the data, right? This is a source system. This is a target system. In a traditional world, what you are doing ETL. In an SAP world, what would we call it? We would call it data provisioning. Could I have used a flat file data provisioning technique to push this data from an SAP system into SAP HANA? Does flat file have that ability? No, right? So the first concept that came into the market was SLT. And now, going back to the earlier discussion, what is the use case? I am pushing an operational data mart. An operational data mart means data mart is nothing but a specific subject area. You pick one subject area. Mike is asking, why not a flat file? That's a very good question, Mike. If you can hold on to that question for like few more minutes, When I talk about the functionality of SLT, you will come to know why I cannot do this with a flat file. One, it is very obvious because this data is already sitting in a database. You have to now go through pushing this data into a file and then push that data into the HANA system. So there are additional steps you are creating in the process. And can you do scheduling on a frequent basis? Can you use your flat file to push data into your target system? I'm not going to be sending the accounts payable data one time into SAP HANA, right? I have to send it very frequently. So those are some of the reasons why, but there is also another reason that we will talk about, which will help you understand that even more clearly. So the reason why I call that SLT is predominantly used for operational data mart. What are these data? Are these analytical data or operational data that you have in the SAP ERP system? These are day-to-day operational data, right? When I pick a specific data mart, which means a data mart is nothing but one subject area. It could be accounts payable, it could be accounts receivable, it could be plant maintenance. When I take a particular subject area which is operational in nature and push it into SAP HANA, the primary use case, that use case was supported and satisfied by this technology called SLT. That's why we coined it as operational data mart. That is how SAP SLT, that is SAP landscape transformation, came into this particular. So what essentially I'm saying is, Mike, this SLT tool, when it originally came into the market to satisfy a requirement, what was it? I wanted to send data from an SAP system like SAP ERP, but not the entire system. I picked one particular section called accounts payable. And accounts payable is a subject area. Would you agree with me so far? It's one particular subject area. So I am taking one subject area's data and send it to the HANA system. So a subject area content in a technology term is called data mart. It is a data warehousing technology. When you talk about data lakes, big data solutions, a data mart is nothing but a specific subject area's information is located in a section called data mart. And because this is operational data, how much is my expenses, how much do I have to owe the vendor, how much do I have to pay the vendor next month, all that information is operational in nature. So by coining these two information together, they called it as operational data mart. And the primary use of an SLT system was to push operational data mart data into SAP HANA. Now, the next question is, so we have seen it is used for operational data mart. Unlike an SLT has some advantages. What are the clean advantages you can see is, because it is an SAP's own technology, as the name itself gives away, SAP landscape transformation. This is a separate tool. This tool can support different types of source systems. The first type is SAP applications. What do I mean by that? You can make your ERP, your S4 HANA, your BW system, your CRM system, your SRM system, no matter what your SAP application is, you can bring data from any SAP application into SAP HANA through this SLT tool. The second advantage here is it can also bring data from non-SAP applications. So can everybody see that the scope of the source system is now expanding when compared to flat file? Flat file could only deal with 3 different file formats. But the moment I choose SLT as a data provisioning techniques, my options are getting opened up. I can connect to any SAP system and bring the data from that system. It doesn't matter what underlying database these applications are being supported. It can be supported by an Oracle, it can be supported by another HANA system, or it could be supported by a SQL Server or IBM DB2. It doesn't matter. As long as if your aim is to bring data from an SAP application system into SAP HANA, SLT can be your tool to push that data. But it doesn't stop there. it is also saying that I can also, SLT is saying I can also support non-SAP applications, but I have a restriction. It says I can only bring data from certified RDBMS system, relational database management system. Essentially, what it's saying is, it's saying I can bring data from an Oracle application, from a SQL Server application, from an IBM DB2. I can bring it from a Teradata system, so on and so forth. What are these databases? These are databases that could have traditionally supported any of my SAP application, which means that SAP has to say these databases, if I wanted, I could have run my SAP ERP using any one of this database. I could have run my BW system with any of these databases. I could have run my CRM system using any of this. So what it is saying is, I can also bring data from an Oracle database into SAP HANA through SLT. But the first question you have to ask is, would an SAP application be able to be supported by that Oracle database? In this case, can it be supported by an Oracle system? If anybody? Any SAP applications, excluding your S4 HANA. Because S4 HANA is a system that can only be supported by an underlying HANA system. But if you look at any of the traditional SAP applications like ERP, BW, CRM, SRM, and all that, they could be supported by an underlying database layer. That underlying database layer could be an Oracle system, it could be a SQL Server system, an IBM DB2, a Teradata, whatever it is. So the only caveat or restriction here is, SLT is saying I can support non-SAP application provided they are certified databases by SAP. So Oracle can work on it, SQL Server, IBM DB2, Teradata. I can bring data from all these different applications. So what I'm essentially saying is, if I have a SQL Server database, or if I have an Oracle database, or if I have any SAP applications, which would have an underlying database support, right? I can bring data from any of these systems into SAP HANA through SLT data provisioning technique. Does that make sense, at least from a theoretical standpoint? Is it making sense that now my scope of this list of source systems has increased? I can go bring data from SAP applications, or I can directly bring data from non-SAP applications, provided those non-SAP applications are certified relational databases like Oracle, SQL Server, IBM2, Teradata, and so on and so forth. So that is the second capability of SLT. The third capability comes back to Mike. If you remember, I asked you to hold on for a minute. What are the other benefits? Why? Vijayata has a question. Can we bring unstructured data as well? No. With this particular process, you cannot bring unstructured data. For unstructured data, you would use business objects data services. Okay. But let me quickly answer Mike's question going back. Mike, you asked me, in the operational data mart scenario, why can I not use flat file? I gave you an initial explanation, but I also hinted a point that flat file does not have the capability of scheduling. Right? I cannot, on a periodic basis, I cannot say every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, push the data from the accounts payable data mart into my SAP HANA system. I cannot do that with a flat file. So scheduling is not possible. But 99.99% of the time, the reason why an organization would choose SLT as its data provisioning technique is, this is the primary goal or reason as to why an SLT tool is used. It can do real-time replication. In addition to supporting scheduling, which means that I can schedule the data to be pushed into SAP HANA on a periodic time, like every 1 hour or every 6 hours or every 24 hours. In addition to that, the main reason why a company would choose to go with SLT is real-time replication. What do I mean by real-time replication? Here is your SAP ERP system. Let's say a transaction is coming in, and this transaction has to load data into an AP table. There could be multiple tables. Let's say there is a table A, there is a table B maintained to contain accounts payable information. As the transaction hits the system appropriately sends the accounts payable data to this table A and B. If you have assigned SLT to push this data into SAP HANA, SLT has a provision. You can say, give me real-time information coming into this table. So anytime a data enters this table A or table B, as soon as the table data has been committed in the table A, immediately the data gets pushed into the target HANA system. And you will see the beauty of that real-time replication when we actually do the hands-on. I will go into the SAP system. I will enter a record in a table and hit save and flip over to HANA Studio and do a refresh. You will see that data is already available in the SAP HANA table. Does that explain your question, Mike, as to why in this particular situation we wouldn't use a flat file? Is there a list of standard tables for SAP application? Yes, there is a way to figure out that also I will explain. When we get into the hands-on process, Mike, I will show you there are 3 sets of tables that you will use to give you the list of entire tables in the SAP application. All right. So we have seen that it is used for operational data mart. It can support multiple types of source systems, all SAP applications, and it also can support non-SAP as long as it's a certified relational database by SAP. The critical benefit of an SLT system is it allows for real-time replication. But it is not only for real-time replication. If you decide to go with scheduling, you can also do schedule. That is, refresh, a timely refresh can also be performed. Vijaya has a question. Is this same as SDI, SDA, or they are different? I noticed the usage of the term also. Yes. So SDI, SDA is another type of data provisioning technique. The only major difference we see between, so I understand where you're coming from, Vijaya. You're probably holding on to the thought of real-time replication. SLT, yes, can perform real-time replication. The major distinction between an SLT and your SDI, SDA, which we will be covering in the later sessions, is SDI physically pushes the data from your source to your target system. So what it does is, if the data, there are 10 records in this table A, it will physically move that data into this table or copy over the table data into HANA system in real time. But in SDI, SDA, what happens is it is a data virtualization concept, which means that you don't physically push the data to the target HANA system. The connectivity between your HANA system and the table A is virtual, which means whatever you have in the table A is visible from your HANA system real time. There is no replication of data, but the concept of real time is similar in SDA, SDI, and SLT system. Hopefully that answered your question. All right. So we have seen that it's used for operational data mart. It can support multiple source systems. Mainly, it can be used for real-time replication or for scheduling. The next thing comes the question of transformation. Can I do transformation? There could be a requirement where I am bringing data from accounts payable table, but when I want to land it in a HANA table, I want to do some kind of data manipulation before I send the data into the target system. Is that possible? We know that only table level transformation was possible in flat file. No data level transformation was possible in my flat file data provisioning. So the question here is, every time we move from one data provisioning technique to another data provisioning technique, I want to show you the benefits of going to another one, right? So here you can do table level changes, just like what you did in your flat file, and you can do data level changes. Both kind of transformations are possible, but take it with a pinch of salt that it's not an extensively blown system that is capable of doing transformation. Why I say that is, what is, if I wanted you to take one thing out of this SLT, what would you say is the most critical capability of this SLT tool? Can anybody point out? I've listed 4 different things, right? Real time comes to our mind as the most critical feature of my SLT system. As soon as transaction hits my accounts payable table, I want it to be available in my HANA table. Would you everybody agree? Right? Immediate update of information from the source to the target HANA system. Now, we are saying, as soon as, let's assume that this particular AP table gets a new record, there is SLT established to do real-time push to my HANA table. Let's call this table as A as well. I want this immediate record to be available in my SAP HANA system. When this is of utmost importance to us, if I start applying business rules in between to manipulate my data and push it to the target system, is my data transfer going to be real time anymore? The more and more transformation and business rules I apply, the system needs to process that and manipulate the information and send it to the target system, right? So it would contradict with my original requirement. So even though there is ability for me to do data level changes and table level changes with SLT's transformation capability, you have to be cautious. You don't want to bombard the SLT system with too much transformation capability, though the system can do it. You don't want to compromise on the most important capability that SLT can provide, which is your real-time replication. Simple transformations can be performed, making sure that this is a very powerful system that we are talking about. So if you make minor transformations, you won't see that delay. It will be like in microseconds. So for your normal eye, you wouldn't see the difference. By the time you refresh it in the HANA system, you would see the transformed information come through. But keep a word of caution here is, don't bombard the SLT system with too much transformation. That being said, I'm going to teach you how to do SLT transformation. Just when you go into a project and people say that you have to do heavy level of transformation, you can tell them, yeah, it is possible with SLT. I will also do that transformation, but keep in mind, you will lose that ability of the real-time replication. There will be some sort of delay. The delay could be a second or 2. I'm not saying that it will be like in minutes, but please remember that you're going to compromise on the real-time replication capability. All right. So these are some of the key activities that a SAP SLT system can be used. The fifth thing is, did SLT, if you think that SLT is the first data provisioning tool that was used by SAP to push data from an SAP application into SAP HANA for sidecar implementation, do you think that SLT was a product that was created by SAP from scratch? To have achieved bringing the data from your SAP system into HANA, the first tool we said was the SLT that was used. Do you think that they would have had enough time to start from scratch a product called SLT? Because SLT, as the name itself suggests, it's SAP Landscape Transformation. So it's a tool created and maintained by SAP. It could have not been a newly created product. And that is true. SAP used to have a parent tool called SLO, which is SAP Landscape Optimizer, SLO. This was created in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So it has been in the market for several decades together. What was the need of this particular tool? This tool was also called as Data Migration Server, DMIS. In short form, it's called DMIS server. What was the need is, if you look at 1980s, in the 1970s, the application was R1, everything was run in mainframe. If you remember from our evolution discussion, in the 1990s, we were using a server-based application where there was the application layer and the database layer, everything was here. So when they wanted to move into the three-tier architecture, which is your client, your application layer, and your database layer, you had to migrate the data from one system to the other. Would everybody agree? You needed, if I wanted to move from a mainframe system to a two-tier architecture system, if this system contains so much data, I needed a tool that can help migrate the data from one system to the other. These are called migration projects. SAP needed a tool if they were advancing their SAP product every so many years or things like that. They had to move customers from their old environment to the new environment. So they would have to do the migration of their system, the data and the system, to help them move into the current system. So how did they do that? They used this technology called SAP Landscape Optimizer, SLO, because it helped with data migration, movement of data from one system to the other. One system to other. Doesn't it kind of look like what SLT is doing? Isn't SLT also pushing the data from one system to the other system? So taking that concept, they advanced it. They made advanced modification to this SAP Landscape Optimizer and renamed it as SAP SLT, SAP Landscape Transformation. So SLT did not start afresh, which means that it is not a product that came from scratch. They took an older parent technology called SLO and made modification and made SLT available to the market. And the last functionality is the entire configuration to get started with SLT is very easy. An admin would take about a day's time, 1 day's time, to complete the entire configuration. And I will also show you the configuration. Unfortunately, I cannot create a new configuration in the system. They won't allow me, the training team would not allow me to, the server team would not allow me to create one. But I will walk you through the steps as to what you need to, there are like 6 steps to create a configuration. I will walk you through in the system, go step by step and show you what, but I won't be able to hit the last step because the last step is to submit the configuration features, which they won't allow me to do. But I will show you what are the 6 steps needed to create a configuration. But as a HANA consultant, you would not be allowed to create these SLT configuration. It's a purely administration activity. The reason why I'm explaining how you would do the configuration is, if you go into an organization and they are brand new starting to configure SLT, you can provide inputs to your administrative team. You can say, hey, these are the things that you need to focus on while creating the configuration. All right. So a quick summary of my SLT data provisioning techniques is, it is used primarily, the real-time use case scenario is operational data mart. Predominantly, you want to push the data as is from the source system, but there is capability for transformation also. The second thing is the source systems that it can support, both SAP and non-SAP system. The non-SAP systems have to be certified RDBMS by SAP. The next thing is it can do real-time replication, but at the same time it can do scheduled replication as well. It can support transformation, both table level transformation and data level transformation is possible. It uses a parent technology called SLO, and the configuration is very quick to be performed. It's very easy, and I will walk you through the steps for how to do the configuration in the system. From a theory standpoint, is everybody understanding what the capabilities of an SLT data provisioning technique is? By a quick show of yes or no, please. Now that we understand the concept, let's go a little deeper into how this setup is going to be made within an organization. So I'm going to come up with 3 different scenarios. So now I'm talking about how to install this SLT system. We understand that SLT is now a separate system, or I can also call it as DMIS system because the parent technology is SLO. DMIS is data migration server. I'm going to talk about what are the 3 different scenarios to install an SLT in an organization. Why is it critical for you to know this is, again, if you're going into a project and they are trying to establish this SLT tool in your organization, there are certain information that needs to be input before you can make a decision on how to install your SLT system. So just like any of your SAP system, an SLT system, if I say SAP ERP, you would know that there is a client layer, there is an application layer, and there is a database layer. Would everybody agree? Whether I take an SAP BW system, SAP CRM, SAP SRM, or SAP ERP, we all know that it is currently following an R3. So SLT is also an SAP system. So it should be no different. An SLT application is also can be accessed through a client. It will also have the application. The application layer is where your SLT license software is residing. And it would also need a database layer to support the activities that are being performed in your SLT. So it will need a database layer. So that it's also using an R3 system or a 3-tier architecture capability. Now the question is, if I have a source system and I have HANA as my target, for our all practical discussion, our HANA system is going to be the target system. Hopefully everybody agrees with that. Now the question is, in order to send the data from here to here, where should I install the SLT system? So we understand SLT is also a system. Where should I install it? That is the question. So there are 3 different scenarios you can use. The first scenario is, and in the first scenario, I can have 2 variations. I'll explain. Scenario 1. So let's call this scenario 1. My source system is an SAP application. Let's assume that if the source is an SAP application and my target system is SAP HANA, how will the SLT installation look like? That's the first scenario. Let's say I have an SAP application here. Let's call this application as SAP ERP. I have an SAP ERP application. I have chosen some data, maybe accounts payable or plant maintenance data, to be pushed to SAP HANA system. So let's bring this SAP HANA system here. I want to push the data from here to here. Now, for installing an SLT, there are certain requirements. So people who are not familiar with SAP might find this a little bit difficult to understand. I will, when I go into in the next session, when I go into the system and walk you through this process, I will show you what I'm talking about. See, we have said that for an SAP HANA system to be running, what kind of an operating system can it run on? Does anybody remember? What kind of an operating system can it run on? It can only run on a Linux operating system. If you remember, SUSE Linux or Red Hat Linux. These are the only. So what I'm essentially saying is, in order for this SAP HANA to be running in this particular box, there are certain specifications. That box has to be supported by a specific type of technology, which is operating system in this case. When it comes to SAP applications like ERP, BW, CRM, SRM, APO, whatever it is, The requirement is the SAP system has to be supported by a technology called NetWeaver technology. For people who don't understand what it is, don't worry about it. Just remember that there is a technology called NetWeaver technology, and the language on which this NetWeaver is written is ABAP programming, Advanced Business Application Programming. The requirement is that an SAP ERP system has to be run on a NetWeaver technology ABAP stack. These ABAP stack each has its own version names. So the version name starts, I think, from 4.6. It all goes to like 7, 7.4, 7.6, 7.8. There are many versions of ABAP stack that are available. Every stack version numbering means that it's an advanced system. Now, for an SLT to be placed in a box like SAP application, any SAP application, the requirement it has is it should be running on a NetWeaver technology, which at least has an ABAP stack version which is greater than or equal to 7.02. Again, a very important certification question. For an SLT, so the application layer to be installed in this box, SLT, your NetWeaver application technology ABAP stack should at least be 7.02 or greater version. But if it was something before 7.2, let's say 4.6 or 4.9 or 5.1, in that particular system, SLT cannot be installed. It has to be supported by a NetWeaver technology ABAP stack of at least 7.02 or greater version. Now, why am I bringing this information? Is there is relevance to it. Let's assume I have a source system called SAP ERP, and it is supported by an ABAP stack, let's say, greater than or equal to 7.06. Let's say it is supporting, current version is 7.0, 7.4. It has a database layer. The database could be an Oracle database or SQL Server. I have my SAP ERP software, license software in the app layer. Now, this box, because it is already in a NetWeaver technology with ABAP stack greater than or equal to 7.02, SAP is giving you a provision. They are saying, don't waste creating another brand new box for installing your SLT. You take your SLT system or your DMIS system. The name can be interchangeably used. You can just put an add-on. You can add on your SLT or your DMIS application right inside the same box itself. What is the only requirement I have for this SLT or DMIS to be put into an SAP box? The ABAP stack version should be 7.02 or greater. In this example, I said it is 7.4. It satisfies that requirement. So I can put the SLT as an add-on into a existing source system called SAP ERP. Now, how will this ERP talk to the SLT system? Again, this is a technology, is the term that is used in SAP world. People who are familiar with SAP might know this. If you don't understand it, just understand that for two SAP systems, it could be an ERP system and BW system, or a BW system and an SRM system, or an SRM system and an APO system. No matter what application it is, when two SAP systems needs to communicate with each other, they use a technology called RFC, Remote Function Call. Simply put, it is an API, Application Programming Interface. If you are not from a technology background, don't worry about it. All you need to remember is two SAP systems, two SAP applications, if they want to communicate with each other to send data or receive data, the communication is established via remote function call. So now SAP ERP is one SAP system. SLT is also another SAP system. So if these two, SAP ERP and SLT, needs to communicate with each other, what is the communication technology it's going to use? Anybody? Just based on what we have just discussed. There are two SAP applications. Two SAP applications will always communicate by a technology called RFC. So the technology, there is something called as an RFC connection that needs to be established between my ERP system and my SLT system. But the only change or only small nuance here is, because ERP system and SLT are both residing within the same box, the type of the RFC communication that is established between two applications sitting inside the same box is referred to as myself RFC. The RFC is happening within the same box. The communication between two applications happening in the same box is called, the technology is RFC because it's within the same box. It's referred to as myself RFC. So if in my ERP application I have tables, the data from this table is communicated to the SLT system through this RFC communication. In this case, it is a myself RFC. Once the data has come over to the SLT system, from the SLT system, the data needs to pass to an SAP HANA system, right? If I'm doing the data provisioning, I have to take the data from the source system. What is my source system in this scenario? SAP ERP. I take the data from that system, send it to the SLT, and the SLT system has to push the data to the SAP HANA system. Now, your immediate thought would be, this is an SAP application. And SAP HANA, the name also says that it's an SAP system. So how will an SAP system like SLT talk to an SAP HANA system? Your initial thought would be like, that also will be an RFC connection. But the small change here is, though SAP HANA is an SAP product, from a product evolution perspective, they treat it as a database. And they don't treat it as an SAP application like SAP ERP or SAP BW or SAP CR. It is only the database, so they don't consider it as an SAP application. Only when an SAP application is talking to another SAP application, you can use RFC connection. When an SAP application is talking to a database, the communication technology used between SAP application and a database is called DB Connect, Database Connect. So now, what is the communication strategy that's going to be sending data from my SLT SAP system into SAP HANA? It is going to use a DB Connect technology. I know it's a lot to process, but again, you don't need to know this information. The only reason I am explaining this to you is, if this discussion happens when you have joined the project, you can provide some input on what to do with the SLT installation. Now, the question here is, if the source system was an SAP application like SAP ERP, running on a NetWeaver technology, which is greater than or equal to 7.02, you can decide to add on your SLT application right within that same box. If you do that, the RFC communication between your SAP ERP and your SLT is going to be RFC myself RFC, and the communication between the SLT system and your SAP HANA system is going to be a database connect, a DB connect. Let's take the same scenario. I will call this as scenario 1A, where my source system is still SAP application and my target system is still SAP HANA. It's still SAP ERP. And let's say it is following the NetWeaver ABAP stack, which is greater than or equal to 7.02. And here is my HANA system. Because this is running on an SAP ABAP stack of 7.02 or greater. So there is a question from Mike. Do you need to add or modify SAP ERP for that to happen? So let's assume that the source system already exists. You don't need to do any modification to the application layer, the SAP ERP, which is the software, and its corresponding database, let's say Oracle, which is where the data is residing. When a transaction hits, the data is getting loaded into the respective table. No changes happens to your application layer and your database layer. Okay. When you add an SLT on top of this, in this underlying Oracle table, there will be few more tables that are created primarily to support your SLT application. So think of it as there's one big house. I am renting the house to two different people. I'm giving one room to SAP ERP, which is a bigger room because SAP ERP has a bigger requirement. And I'm giving a small room as rent to SLT system, if that analogy helps. So because you have given a new room to SLT, you're not making any modification to the room that is already occupied by SAP ERP. If that room already has a full restroom, it will continue to use that full restroom for its capability. For the new room that you have allocated for SLT, you might probably allocate. So if you don't have any additional room, then it's a different. That's exactly where we are heading toward in the scenario 1A. Okay, so I think you're heading in the right direction, Mike. So my thought process is, if even if there is a room, your existing tenant says that I don't want to share my facilities with another person, you can say, even though this system is capable of holding my SLT system, my existing tenant ERP does not want to share the house with anybody else. You can go ahead and create a separate SAP box. What is the only requirement for this SAP box? It should be a NetWeaver ABAP stack with greater than or equal to 7.02 version. I will go ahead and say the SAP SLT software will be installed here. I would have an Oracle or a SQL Server system to support the functionalities of the SLT system. I will keep this system as a separate box. Correct. There is additional cost. Now you're building a new box altogether. For this communication to happen, for SAP ERP to talk to SAP SLT, can anybody tell me what technology would you choose to communicate between the ERP system and the SLT system? So you would use, because it's an SAP application to SAP application discussion, it would use an RFC communication. In this case, would you call it as RFC or would you call it as myself RFC? Because they are not sharing the same box, it won't be called myself anymore. In the previous example, Mike, if you remember, SAP ERP was also in the same system box and SLT was also in the same box. So that's why it's my own box. Think of it that way. That's why it's referred to as a myself RFC. But in this case, they are two separate boxes. So I would use a regular RFC connection. Now, to send the data from my SAP SLT system to a HANA database, what is the communication I would use? Perfect. DB connect. Now, the reason why I'm explaining these scenarios to you is, now you are going into a project, and let's assume that, let me minimize this a little bit just to explain a concept, and then I will enlarge it again. You are given an SAP source system like SAP ERP. You're going into a project. The requirement is to do SLT data provisioning from an ERP system to SAP HANA. Your ERP system is a NetWeaver ABAP stack greater than or equal to 7.02. Now you and everybody, the admin team, everybody is sitting together and discussing, where should I install the SLT system? Now my source system is already NetWeaver ABAP stack 7.02 or greater. So essentially I can choose option 1 or option 1A. I can either choose to put my SLT as an add-on in the existing SAP ERP system itself, in the source system itself, or I can create an SAP SLT's box separately and keep it separate from my ERP application. Now, the question is, given these two choices are possible, which one would you recommend? These are the questions that would help show your credibility that you know the system well, you have done actual work experience in SAP HANA. If I'm giving you these two choices, your SLT can be put as an add-on or it can be created as a separate system. Which one would you prefer and why? What are your thought process? So Felix is saying he would choose option 1A. Mike is saying, so let's say Felix is putting 1A. So Vijayata's thought process is because to save cost, right? I agree that Vijayata is saying that if you add on your SLT to the existing box, you are not creating a new box. You don't have to buy another Oracle database or some database to support it. Option 2, if we want to connect different systems other than SAP, very good. Those are all good points. So the one critical thing that you want to, so what if this question is asked in an interview, the one critical aspect there, all the answers that you have mentioned are exactly right. Option 1 would be chosen if you are looking at cutting cost. That's the primary takeaway from cost savings is the primary goal if you go with one option. The second option would invariably win all the time because it is much more stable option. And I will explain. Your production ERP system contains the SLT sitting inside it. For some reason, there is a power outage or some corruption happens within your SLT. Now the SLT box is sitting inside your ERP application and something went wrong. You have to shut down the system. To make the fix, you have to shut down the system. You cannot individually shut down the SLT add-on. You have to shut down the entire SAP ERP system to fix the issue with your SLT system. In a production environment, can you turn off your critical application called SAP ERP for doing some fix with an SLT application? Can we do that? Is that possible? Will your organization allow? Will you say that I need 3 hours? Don't ask your users to run any transaction at this 3 hour window. I'm going to fix my SLT, which is sitting in your ERP application. Nobody would allow this organization to do that. So even though there is a little bit of cost involved in scenario 1A, you would want to separate your ERP application from your SLT only for the reason that you can control the maintenance of an SLT system independent of your source system. If it was a separate box, I could bring this down and up anytime I want. That has no relevance to what is happening with ERP. ERP can continue to bring in transaction and store the data. I can always take the SAP SLT system offline, make fixes and bring it back. There will be a delay in sending the information to my target HANA system, but that is less critical than stopping your ERP system. So we all understand that in a typical organization landscape, you will have an SAP development system, you will have at least a QA or a testing system, and you will have a production system at the bare minimum. I'm talking, let's say, SAP ERP, SAP ERP, SAP ERP, right? So a hybrid approach would be to save cost. You would use when you're doing SLT with your development system, you have an SAP ERP system, which is a development system, and you want to send data to SAP HANA, which is also a development environment. In this case, you would install your SLT as an add-on because development system is purely for developers to work on. In that case, you don't need a separate SLT system unnecessarily. Similarly, for your testing system also, it is not a live system. It's just used by your users for testing. So for development and testing systems, you can take approach 1, whereby you are saving cost. But when it comes to your production system, you want to keep, even though there is a cost involved, it's better to maintain it as a separate system. Does that make sense for everybody? I understand all your points were valid. I'm just bringing out a point from an interviewer's perspective, right? What is the key distinction that they are looking for in this information? And if you were able to present this information, let's assume that you go into the project and you're having discussions with the senior management, your administration team, and they are discussing what to do. You can exactly bring this point up to them and say, what is your threshold for bringing down your SAP application? If you want to, if you're okay with a couple of hours of maintenance during the middle of the day, then you take the risk of adding your SLT system as an add-on. But if not, then you have to better go with an SLT separate box. So that being said, let's quickly look at 2 more scenarios. Now that you've got a hang of the scenarios, it should go through fast. Scenario 2 is, again, source system is SAP application. Target system is SAP HANA. You might ask me why again we are talking about SAP application. There's a small twist to this. I have an SAP system here. Let's say it could be an SAP ERP or a BW or whatever it is. I have my HANA system. Now, the only difference you're going to see here is this particular application is not supported by a NetWeaver ABAP stack it is less than 7.02. It could be a 4.6, it could be a 5, it could be a 5.5, whatever it is. It could be a 6 version. Let's say your company is still running an older version of application, ERP application. Can I install SLT into this box as an add-on? It's an SAP application, it's an SAP box, but can I add on SLT into this particular box? Anybody? The reason is it doesn't satisfy the requirement that ABAP stack should be greater than or equal to 7.02, correct? So even if I want to do cost savings, I cannot install SLT into this particular box because it doesn't satisfy my ABAP stack version. So in such cases, the only other choice you have is you bring up a separate SLT box. It has to be on a NetWeaver ABAP 7.02 or greater. You install your SLT application here. Now this ERP application will communicate to my SLT using what technology? I'm sure everybody knows by now. It would use a RFC, regular RFC, because they are 2 different boxes. SLT would talk to my HANA system through a DB connect. Hopefully this makes sense to everybody, right? I cannot, even if I wanted to do an add-on installation of SLT into my source application box, I could have not done it because the ABAP stack version is not meeting the requirements to have an SLT application inside it. And lastly, last scenario 3, if my source system is a non-SAP application and my target system is SAP HANA. So far, we discussed how to bring data from an SAP application into SAP HANA. But what if my source system is, let's say, an Oracle or a SQL Server or an IBM DB2 database? I want to, there are many tables sitting here. I want to push these tables into SAP HANA. This is a database, right? A certified RDBMS. Now, can I add SLT into this database? Can I add into this? Let's assume this box is an Oracle database box. Can I put SLT as an add-on into this particular box? This is a non-SAP technology. What is the requirement for SLT to be installed inside a box? It should be supported by a SAP technology NetWeaver ABAP stack. That box should be ABAP stack 7.02 or greater. This is a completely non-SAP system. We don't know what kind of a box it is. It doesn't understand what ABAP is all about, right? It is a completely non-SAP system. So the box has to be a NetWeaver ABAP stack of greater than 7.02. The database has nothing to do with SAP technology. So even if I want, I cannot install SLT on a non-SAP application. In this case, the only choice I have is I bring up another box for SLT, satisfying this requirement, and I install my SLT system. For a database to communicate with an SAP application, what is the communication technology that I would use? A DB connect, because an SAP application and a database is communicating always through DB connect. And how will the SLT connect to the SAP HANA? That again will be a DB connect. Does that make sense for everybody? So these are the different scenarios. So if somebody is asking me, how will I establish a connectivity between a non-SAP application, an SLT and an SAP HANA? A non-SAP application will live separately. You will bring up a box for SLT separately. The only restriction for that is it should be NetWeaver ABAP stack greater than or equal to 7.02. The connectivity between that database and the SLT will be through a DB connect, and the SLT will talk to SAP HANA through another DB connect capability. So these are the different scenarios that you have to remember in the pocket, in the back of your mind. If you get the opportunity to interact with people at the stage where they have to make a decision on installing the SLT, you can provide your input based on these different scenarios.